Hello my friends and welcome back to my channel. Okay, so today I have a monthly reading wrap up for you. We're going to go over October, talk about the books that I've read, my favorites, my least favorites. There will maybe be a rant. There's going to be a rant in here. And then some gushing, of course. So for the month of October, I read 12 books, and of those 12, 3 of them were arcs, so that's good, but it's nowhere near the amount of arcs that I was supposed to read. So anyway, let's move right along into, no, wait. 4 of them were arcs. Even better, 4 of them were arcs. So I started off the month with Sunlight by Devney Perry. This is the second book in her new contemporary romance, small town romance, cowboy romance series that I really am enjoying. I liked the first book in this series, but I loved Sunlight. I thought it was so good. This is just everything that I want in a Devney Perry romance is in this book. I adored it. I gave it 5 stars. I did listen to an audio arc, and I think the audio is fantastic. So if you like audiobooks, this is a great one. Definitely would recommend it. It is so sweet and so swoony, and I just adore it. So the basic premise is our hero and heroine meet. Our heroine is really going through some tough times with her family. We learn that a little bit at a time throughout the course of the book, all the way up until the very end. And she's also very much struggling financially because of some actions that have happened with her family in the past. So she finds herself in this small town working for this ranch that is featured in the whole series. And she ends up meeting our hero, who is the son of who used to be the ranch owner, and he is basically head of the horse training and the horse riding and things like that. She ends up meeting him at a grocery store one day when she's trying to just ask if she can use the cart to push it to her little dive apartment, and he kind of steps in and saves the day for her and makes it so it's doable, and that's when they first have a meeting and a connection. And there's definitely some sparks that are flying between the two of them, and they just have this excellent connection right from the get-go. And that's something that I really love about Devney's books for the ones that I love. The ones that I love by her, she really establishes that connection, that feeling of, I met this person and there's something about them that is just drawing me to them that undeniable, that I love that so much. She doesn't, however, know that the hero who saved her actually works at the ranch and will be essentially her boss, until she shows up to work and she sees that's who it is. So throughout the course of the book, they're kind of circling each other. They're trying to avoid one another because not only do they have that emotional type of connection, but they have strong physical connection as well. And then ultimately they give in, they have one night together, and she ends up pregnant. And so the rest of the book is them kind of trying to work on this relationship and them coming together in that way, and I just loved and adored this so much. Probably my favorite thing about this book is that you get to be in the hero's point of view for a lot of the book, and he is just so completely smitten and gone with her. This is a man who is obsessed and worships her, and it's so fun to be in his point of view to read that. I just absolutely love this romance. I loved watching him step up to want to be a dad. I loved the couple. I loved everything about it. It was cozy, romantic, swoony. It's everything that you want in a small town romance. Okay, so now the next book that I read is Empire the Vampire. So this is an adult fantasy, dark fantasy, and I freaking loved this book. This was a 6-star read for me. I was just captivated from the first page to the last page. There was not a single moment in this book where I was bored, and that's saying something because this book really plays around with a lot of different structural elements, like how it's telling you the story. There are multiple timelines, there are skips ahead into the future, skips back into the past, and it's very interesting how the story is being told. But typically, a lot of the times, unless I'm deeply invested in the characters, when we change timelines or when we skip to a different part of the story, sometimes I can lose interest there, and that wasn't the case with this book. I was immediately hooked. I adored these characters, even though they aren't always perfect characters. I just thought they were fantastic, and I loved this book. So this is essentially about, we have our hero Gabriel, who is basically a vampire hunter. He's the last one of his order who is surviving, and in this world at the time, vampires are finally able, for some unknown reason, to walk in the daylight, and so because of that, humans are kind of on the verge of going extinct, and there's this big battle, not a big battle, but a big war is raging, essentially, between vampires and humans, and who's going to be surviving of the two of them. So Gabriel ends up captured by a vampire, and this is like a vampire historian, and essentially he's told that he has to relate his history to him, to tell his story, how he ended up where he was. And so you get his story in different timelines. You get to see all the people he met, the loves, the lives that he's the people that he's killed, the things that he's done, the lives that he loved that have left him, that have died or whatever. It's just fascinating. It is fascinating. And just very, very compelling, great characters. Like, everything about this book hits everything that I'm looking for. It has really beautiful, haunting prose, has a very strong story element with a lot of mystery and intrigue, characters that are flawed, but you really root for and you just love them so much. So I adored this book. I am currently reading the second one, and I can't wait to continue on with this series, so 6 stars for this one. Okay, now the next book that I read was also an ARC. This one is also, I got an e-ARC, but I ended up listening to the audio because I didn't get the e-ARC read in time, but it is Secret Love by Willow Aster. This is the second book in her, I believe this is the Single Dad's Playbook series, and I've really enjoyed this series. I think it's very sweet, it's very fun, it's very low angst. If you want a romance that has a very minimal plot, like, there's hardly any breakup in here. If you want something like that, like, this is the series for you. If you just want something sweet and cozy and romantic, like, this is gonna fit the bill for you. So there's a little bit of an age gap in here. Our hero is a little bit older. He's in his late 30s. He's a football star, and he is a single dad to these young girls, some of them who are maybe, I think the oldest is like 12. And she, our heroine, is a little bit younger. She's just starting her career. She wants to be a teacher, and she ends up being the substitute teacher to one of his girls. And that's how they end up meeting. And she ends up working with one of the daughters who's having a learning disability, and she's trying to help her through that. And because they're in, like, forced proximity, they obviously end up falling in love. Now, there's more to their chemistry and how they met and how they fell in love than just their forced proximity, right? Because if that were the case, people would always be in love, right? But I really, really loved how they have a meet cute in the beginning. And it's so cute, it's so fun, lots of chemistry between them. They meet at a coffee shop, and this is a man who is amicable with his ex-wife, and he just thinks that, you know, love is maybe not for him. He's not even really interested in flings or one-night stands or anything like that. And then he sees this woman, and he's immediately, like, his interest is piqued. Like, there's something different about her, right? I love that so much. And then something happens where he confuses her for a teacher who was mean to his daughter, and so he kind of yells at her when he sees her again at the school, and so they kind of have a little bit of a rift there, but not much. And honestly, like, this book is so romantic, it's so sweet, it's so fun. If that's what you're looking for, this series is for you, for sure, because they're very easy to read, they're very comforting. There is some heavier elements in here, but she doesn't really dive deep in there. Like, this one deals with PTSD, depression type of things, and the first one has even heavier content, but they still somehow manage to feel very light and cozy. So I really enjoyed this. I gave it 5 stars. Now the next one is a little bit of a disappointment. I read Spookily Yours, which is a Halloween romance. I was super in the mood for Halloween romances. I was like, give me all of the creepy, cozy, cute. I was like, Halloween town, yes, I want it. I want all the Halloween stuff, right? So I picked this up. It's a very short book, and I really enjoyed it for about the first 60% of this book, because we have a witch and her sister. They're orphans, their parents have died, and they run this cute coffee shop and bake shop together. But the sister that we're following in this book, she is, you know, she's just lost her cat, and so she's trying to find a new familiar, a new cat. She finds this one cat who she feels drawn to, brings him into her home. Lo and behold, he's actually a demon who is stuck in a cat form, and so they end up working together with that. And again, that undeniable connection that they meet, they feel something for one another, they feel like there's something different about this person, and obviously because this is kind of paranormal fantasy, you have an element of, well, is this my mate? Things like that. And it was just very, very cute. Like, the whole setting in this, the whole vibe is definitely giving Halloween cute, spooky vibes, and I love that. Like, I love it so much. But I did end up giving this book 3 stars, mostly because okay, so this book, I have a big problem with books that have huge tonal shifts, right? I know it's something that everybody jokes about, like cinnamon roll on the street, like alpha in the sheets, like that's a big, people love that. I find that to be very jarring if the author doesn't take some time to shift that tone a little bit of nuance, you know? Like, I don't like the very abrupt shift from this sweetheart guy who all of a sudden is then like this dirty talking slammer up against the wall. Like, I'm just like, it doesn't work for me. I don't like it, right? So once these two started getting together physically, I immediately, like, my interest tanked, because that was all that they did for the last 30% of the book or so. It was just seemed too abrupt of a tonal shift. It had such cute, cozy, almost like a YA romance vibe in the front, because she's very naive and it's very sweet and wholesome in that way, and then you kind of like shift very abruptly, and I just was like, Oh man, like I was really hoping this was going to be a good one, you know? Like I would have really loved to see that transition not be so abrupt and not so harsh. And I understand this is a novella, but it can be done, okay? So I gave it 3 stars and I liked it. But unfortunately, I feel like because of that, this is a book that I will never reread in the holiday season, in the Halloween season, because I know what's coming and it just totally drops off everything that I'm looking for in a cozy Halloween romance. So that was disappointing. Okay, so now the next book, however, is one of my favorite books of all time that I have read this year, and it is another arc, and it is The Beast Takes a Bride by Juliette Long. This is the latest in her Palace of Rogues historical romance series. I have gushed endlessly about this series. I love it so freaking much. If you love historical romance and you have not checked out this series yet, please, I am begging you, do it. Even if you don't love historical romance, if you like really swoony romances with like alpha heroes who are also cinnamon rolls, alpha cinnamon rolls, I call them alpha mellows, like you will love this series. If you like good banter, if you like a good bit of humor, like please, I'm begging, this series needs more love. It's so freaking good. And this one may be my newest favorite yet. I loved it so freaking much. So this is a marriage in trouble essentially, but it was the way that they ended up together. He was very hopeful on his side. He is this very, very famous, very, you know, strong, impenetrable fortress of a man, and he was in the Navy, I believe. I actually can't remember what his rank was, but he's like a very well-regarded military man, right? And he does not want any tarnishes on his reputation. So this woman that he married, that he has been estranged from all these years, we open the book and she's in Newgate, the prison for women, and he comes to rescue her, and he's like, I can't have you tarnishing my name. And so they make plans where she is going to go to America to live and he's going to stay in London, and she's pretty heartbroken about that, and he's also heartbroken about that because even though they've been estranged the whole time they've been married, I think it's maybe been like 5 years or something like that, it's because of what happened on their wedding night. Something happened, some event, some catalyst caused this division between the two of them, and she feels a great amount of guilt because of that, and he feels a great amount of heartbreak because of that. But there are still feelings there. Like, he feels so much for her. He had so much hope that this was going to be his bride, the love of his life, and it was just like, ugh. So this book is a bit angsty, but it's also very, very healing and very, very hopeful and just full of beautiful small moments that I want to tell you about so badly. But I can't because it will be spoilers, but if you love people who defend people that they, if you love books where people defend the person that they love, but the person that they love doesn't know that they love them, like, you're gonna love this for sure. If you love a hero who takes a token of the heroine and keeps it in his pocket for years and years and years, you're going to love this, like Derek Craven. I just love this book. This is a 6-star romance. I loved it. Probably, quite possibly, my favorite historical romance I've read this year. It was so good. You guys need to read it, please. I'm begging you. Okay, so then the next one is a reread that I'm not going to really go into detail here about, and it is Wolf Gone Wild by Juliette Cross. This is a paranormal romance. This series is so fun. This is paranormal romance rom-com. Excellent writing, great characters, great found family, great swoony romances, like great plotting. This has everything you want in a great, strong paranormal romance. Beautiful romance, steamy. It's just perfect. It's perfection. So this was a reread for my Patreon book club, and I adored it even more the second time. So when I originally read this like 4 years ago, I wasn't doing 6-star reads, but now that I am, this is definitely a 6-star read for me. I freaking loved and adored it so dang much. So then the next book that I read is Bride by Ali Hazelwood, and this is where we're going to get into a little bit of a rant. So I also read and vlogged this on Patreon. This vlog is available exclusively for So Delicious tier members in my Patreon. Every month I vlog the book for our book club, and what I've been trying to do as much as time allows is it also include a bonus book, so usually like the runner-up in our poll for what they voted we wanted to read. So that's what I did with Bride. And I will say, I have definitely struggled with some of Ali's books, most of her books. The only one that I've really enjoyed is The Love Hypothesis, which I thought was fun. I gave it 5 stars at the time when it came out. If I were to reread it now, I don't think it would be 5 stars, but I liked it a lot. Didn't love other books that I've read from her. They were okay, not terrible. I really disliked her other new release, Not in Love This Year. It was so not for me. I don't like her writing style. I don't think she writes romance convincingly. To me, it feels like she has never been in a relationship, honestly. I'm just sort of like, I don't understand. Anyway. So I really didn't like Bride. I gave it 2 stars. I found it to be disappointing in basically every single way. Disappointing on a world-building aspect. When we're in an urban fantasy setting, this is about werewolves and vampires, arranged marriage between a vampire and a werewolf. The vampires in this world, you know, don't feel emotions really strongly. The werewolves do, so it feels a little Psy-Changeling-esque. Like, very clearly she borrowed that from the Psy-Changeling world. And I just didn't like anything about this book, right? The internal dialogue, the heroine's point of view, was hugely annoying to me. I've never found an Ali Hazelwood heroine to be so annoying and insufferable as this one. She was just so quirky and over the top, and I feel like this book really confirmed to me that this is all Ali Hazelwood knows how to write, is this type of a heroine. And it's worked before. I think it works well in her STEMinist books, but when we have a vampire here who's supposed to be cold and unfeeling, and we get this quirky little geek, it's kind of doesn't work for me, you know? So that was very annoying. Also, the hero in this book is such a carbon copy alpha werewolf hero, stereotypical. There's nothing about him that is unique or stand out. He is a cardboard cutout character, literally flat, boring, could not care less about him. Their romance was pretty much non-existent. They get together physically a few times, and I just felt like they had no on-page chemistry, they had no on-page emotional connection, and I just could not care less about their romance. Now, all of that has to do largely with how the characters are constructed and being in the heroine's point of view, but also, for over 40% of this book, the hero and heroine don't even really meet. They know one another, they maybe have a chance meeting, but for 40% of the book, we're in the heroine's head trying just to learn the world, and the info dumping in this book is severe. And I don't really understand why she felt the need to do that, because she's not doing anything new or unique or interesting with these vampires. This is all readily accepted in the canon of vampire werewolf pop culture references. So there's no need to have this much constant info dumping. It was relentless and it was so boring. Like, I had to like push myself through this book. I did not care about it. I didn't enjoy it at all. And I feel like this book has over 400,000 ratings, so it's definitely going to be a top contender in the Goodreads Choice Awards. And I feel like, I have to say, almost all of those 400,000 star ratings, rave reviews, they have to be from whoever read this. This is their first paranormal romance they've ever picked up. And if it is, I can see how they would enjoy it, right? Because it's very easy to understand. It's, you know, it's sort of laying the groundwork of all the paranormal romances that have come before. But I found it very boring and very disappointing. 2 stars. Okay, now the next book that I read is The Striker by Ana Huang. I absolutely loved this book. I loved it so much. I gave it 5 stars. This is the first in her new sports romance series, which I believe is going to have 2 books. So this book has Aster, our soccer player, I guess it's in England, so it's a football player hero who is exceptionally talented and very gifted and is like a big name in the footballer world. And then we have our heroine, Scarlett, who is a former ballerina at the Royal Academy of Ballet, I believe, in England. But she was in an accident, so she has an injury and chronic pain, and she isn't able to dance at the way that she is used to dancing. And she ends up coaching our hero and her brother because their coach says that they need to work on some of the basics, and so she starts training them in ballet, essentially. So that's how they end up meeting. They have a beautiful, slow building, but also sparks everywhere type of romance. And I just loved and adored this book. I loved the external conflict. I loved the internal conflict. I loved that we got equal points of view of both hero and heroine. I loved seeing the chronic pain on paper, something that is an invisible illness that causes a debilitating amount of pain. I think it was very well described in here. I think it was very well shown on page. It felt very true to my own lived experience because I do have chronic pain and it is absolutely debilitating and devastating, and I loved seeing that representation in here. But most of all, I just absolutely loved watching these two fall in love. It was so romantic. There were so many gestures the two of them did equally. It never felt like unbalanced, like he was the one who was constantly serving her. It was very balanced, you know. And so when we come to the final conflict in this book, it was heartbreaking, but it felt like it was necessary. And I loved seeing the character growth that resulted from that. So I loved seeing the Easter eggs from other characters in her books that I really loved and enjoyed. And this was everything that I wanted in an Ana Huang sports romance. This was fantastic. I loved it so much. And I also will say that these characters are about 30 and they definitely felt mature. This doesn't feel like a new adult at all. This feels like people who are grown-ups who are making grown-up choices, and I loved it. I loved it so freaking much. Now the next book is another reread that I reread for my Fable book club, and it is To Beguile a Beast by Elizabeth Hoyt. This is one of my all-time favorite historical romances. I have a full reading vlog reading this for the first time that is quite old. I think it was from 2020 as well. This is basically about our heroine who is on the run from a protector, essentially. She was a kept woman. She has these 2 children who are byblows of him, and she's trying to get away. She ends up at our hero's place, who is in this sort of dilapidated castle, and he's a scarred hero. He doesn't love anybody. He has a great dog, and he's definitely grumpy, right? She ends up working for him, and they end up falling in love, and it's just so beautiful. I love this type of historical romance. To me, this is one of Elizabeth Hoyt's best. I think this was the first book I read from her, and that's probably why it still remains one of my favorites, but I adored it. It was perfection. Fantastic. Okay, now the next book that I read is A Journey Thrice Begun by Sean Bobby Kerr. So this is another ARC that I received. This is a debut fantasy, and this book is really incredible, honestly. Like, I wasn't quite sure what to expect from this book. You can read the blurb to get a full synopsis of what's going on here, but essentially this is in a fantasy world, a high fantasy world, high fantasy setting, so it's not our world. This is a completely made-up world, very well thought out, very well constructed. It feels very real even though it's not, and we follow our main character Everett, who begins this book on Charing Night in this land, which is essentially the only night that you can ask your beloved to marry you. So everyone gets engaged on Charing Night. It comes once a year, and Everett is going to ask the woman that he loves to be his bride. But however, as he's on the journey to do that, he ends up constantly finding roadblocks in his way. New characters are introduced, things pop up that he was not expecting, and he kind of ends up on this series of mini adventures to get to the night where he's going to ask his beloved to marry him. It's all very fun, it's all very fascinating, and in the beginning it's very cozy, it's very whimsical, it feels very fairy tale-esque. And even the writing style, like the writing style of this was so uniquely beautiful. It's very charming, it's very cozy, it really says a lot about the characters, and I can't help but feel like there's a little bit of humor, a little bit of whimsicalness to the writing style in the beginning that kind of reminds me a little bit of Trust of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. However, once Charing Night actually happens, some tragedy strikes, and Everett then has to make some choices of what he's going to do with his life next. And that leads us to, like, the second part of the story, where he is going again on another adventure to connect with people that he has met before. And that really is what throws him into this terrible circumstances that gets very, very dark. So you have what appears to be cozy fantasy in the first part of the book, and then grim dark fantasy, because bad things happen. Bad things happen. We are afraid. It is dark. Things are bad. Things are horrifying that are happening. And I really, really liked the way that those two meshed up together. You know, like earlier I was talking about tonal shifts, abrupt tonal shifts. And this is a very interesting case of a fantasy book that has a wide range of tonal shifts, but the abruptness is subtle. It's small. You know, you can see how it organically comes and happens. It's never just a complete delineation of cozy grimdark, and I really, really enjoyed that. I found this book to be very compelling. I could not put it down. It took me quite a while to read because it is quite long and I don't have a lot of free time to read, but I was always thinking about it. I was never bored. I love these characters. Everett is so just wholesome and pure, and the things that he goes through, like my sweet baby child, like I don't want anything bad to happen to him. This was just so much fun and just really epic, and I can't wait to see where the rest of the story goes. So this is definitely an author to watch. I'm very, very impressed with this debut fantasy from him. Okay, the next book that I read is Rein Me In. So this is a cowboy romance. I am always on a cowboy romance kick lately. I just can't get enough of them. They're so fun. This one has a lot of heavier content, however, as both the hero and the heroine are dealing with a substantial amount of grief. The hero has lost his father, and he's trying to financially salvage their ranch, their family, because their father left them in some pretty dire straits, so they're really struggling financially, and he's a pretty young guy. He's like 24 years old. He feels mature. He doesn't feel like a child, though. And our heroine is 29, and she is grieving the loss of her brother, and she feels partially responsible for that. So she has put aside some of the things that she loves, like riding horses, and she's really, really struggling to overcome that grief. The two of this couple meets, and he actually was friends with her brother, And she is a plus-size heroine. She's very comfortable in her body, and the hero absolutely loves her body. Thinks she's luscious, sexy, beautiful. Their romance, I felt like, was so beautiful and so tender, and there's so much internal work done here with the characters. Very little plot is happening. I mean, there's plot happening on the outside, but this is really very much an internal journey of these two characters and them falling in love and trying to work through their own grief and trauma and associated guilt with that. And I just loved it. This was going to be a 5-star read for me. However, the epilogue in here, I feel like, really did a disservice to the story because it just kind of put a gratuitous sex scene in here that I felt like would have worked better previously in the book and had the epilogue be something else. But to have that be the way our story ends, I just felt like I didn't love it. I didn't love it at all, and it really tanked a lot of this book for me, so that is what sent this to a 4-star. Okay, so now the last book that I read is Feathers from the Sky by Jess Wisecup. This is a paranormal romance. This is the second book that I've read from this author, and I did really enjoy this book. I found it to be very compelling. I really liked the unique take on the vampires and the vampire hunters in here. Our heroine is the daughter of a vampire hunter, and our hero is a vampire himself, and he is out to try and find who is responsible for killing his brother, and he believes it is her. So he's been stalking her and watching her, and he is, in the course of doing that, he's falling in love with her, right? And he is trying to find who killed his brother, and he believes that either she did it or she knows who did it. So they end up falling in love in the beginning, but lo and behold, he has nefarious purposes because he kidnaps her, so he was just trying to get close to her, kidnaps her, takes her back to his vampire people, and that's where this book starts to get into dark romance territory, which I found really fascinating, and I liked the push and pull of the darkness that he had, that he was like being very dominant, he was kind of being a little abusive, but then he would also be sweet. I found that to be interestingly done and very compelling. I also will say that the ending in here was fantastic. It came with a twist that I really wasn't expecting, and that's something this author does really, really well. I very much enjoyed that. However, I did end up giving this book 4 stars, and that's largely because I just feel like a lot of moments where the characters could be developing their relationship or progressing the story in a different way, the author relies on steam to do that, and I just don't like that personally. I don't prefer that at all, so 4 stars for this one. Alright, my friends, there you have it. That is my October reading wrap-up. I hope y'all enjoyed this video. If you made it this far, please feel free to let me know what your favorite book of October was, and if you want to leave me an emoji, I'd love to have a leaf, and I'll see y'all in my next video.